Hello? Oh, great. This is working and on. Hi. Y'all, if I can have your attention, we're going to try to get started. Keep it on schedule today. Thank you. First, I'd just like to welcome everybody here to our 79th annual KIOGA convention. I'm glad to see all these faces. We weren't sure who all was going to show up today. Obviously, everybody knows how tough things are out there. First, we're going to start out by paying tribute to the members and associates and members of their families who we've lost in the last year. I'm going to name their names, and then we're going to have a moment of silence. So if you can listen, here are the people we lost. John Nemnick, who's Ed Nemnick's father. Thomas Murray with Insurance Center, Inc. Paul Masterson with Insurance Specialist Group. Frank Novi, Novi Oil and Gas. Robert Gensch, retired petroleum geologist. Albert Hogeboom, Hogeboom Oilfield Trucking. Leonard M. Ropfogel, Falcon Exploration. Chaz Sanders, retired producer. Joan Schiff Barron, Adam Barron's mother. Kay Sloan, Ed Cross's mother-in-law. Ralph Reber, Petroleum Management, Inc. Leroy Orth, retired from Lario Oil and Gas Company. Gerald W. Raines, White Tiger Resources. Kenneth Hoop, retired from J. Fred Hambright, Inc. L.D. Davis with L.D. Drilling. Max Houston, retired geologist from Brexco. And Trevor McCoy, the son of Kevin McCoy. Can you please have a moment of silence while we remember these people. Thank you very much for that. Now, I want to introduce someone who doesn't need an introduction, but deserves a lot of credit for the monumental job he is doing as president of KIOGA. As chairman, I have come to appreciate the work Ed does to stay in touch with all of the issues facing our industry and to stay on top of them and to work closely with other state associations and members of the Kansas and Washington representatives. So, Ed?
Thank you, Nick. Well, good morning, and I too want to welcome everyone to our 79th annual convention. I think we're going to have a good program today. And I also want to thank you for your time to be here and appreciate your support for KIOGA. I know I talked to Governor Brownback earlier, and he was looking forward to being here to offer a welcome introductory talk, but he did get called away had some other obligations that he had to take care of, and so he couldn't be here, but he was kind enough to put together a video for us, and so we have a video I think we're going to run of Governor Brownback with some welcoming comments.
Hi, I'm Governor Sam Brownback, and I'm happy to welcome you to the 2016 KIOGA Convention and Expo. I'm certainly sorry I couldn't be there with you today for this great event, but I'm glad you have come together from across Kansas to discuss and advance this vital segment of our state's economy. Your work in the oil and gas industry is truly critical to both the Kansas economy and to the lives and communities around the world. Now, you've faced some tough economic headwinds this past year, and we've certainly felt them. But you've weathered them well, and in true Kansas spirit, you continue to work long and hard to ensure your families and businesses succeed. As governor, I've focused on building a business-friendly environment in our state, especially for small businesses like those that make up the Kansas independent oil and gas industry. This year, I'm also happy to declare victory on an issue that has literally pecked away at western Kansas for some years now, the lesser prairie chicken. Now, while far-off bureaucrats attempted to micromanage a bird they knew little about, their listing of the bird as a threatened species harmed industries and limited oil and gas production in our state. After months of fighting in court, we won. The lesser prairie chicken was delisted, and population surveys now indicate bird numbers are returning to normal levels after rain returned to the area, just like we said they would. By continuing to grow our state's economy and resisting federal interference in state matters, we can help assure the future of Kansas in the energy industry. I appreciate the work of KIOGA and its members. You represent much of the spirit of Kansas. You're hardworking, determined, and you get the job done. Together, we're making Kansas the best state in America to raise a family and grow a small business. Keep up the great work. God bless you all. Have a great expo and convention.
Okay, now it's my pleasure to introduce our chairman of KIOGA, Nick Powell. Nick does a fantastic job, just like all the past chairmen that we have, freely giving of his time and efforts, and we're very lucky to have a chairman like Nick leading our organization. So Nick, let me turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ed. First, I do want to thank the governor for sending us a statement. He has always been a friend of our industry, and we've appreciated his support. Well, things are tough out there, very tough for us, as we all know. And to show you how tough, I want to tell you a tale. This is a story about two young ladies who are walking down a pathway in a park, and they come across this big, large frog sitting in the middle of the path. And they look at that frog, and it's a really strange-looking frog, and all of a sudden the frog starts talking to them and says, "Ladies, ladies, please, I need your help. A wicked witch from the EPA has turned me into a frog. And the only way that I can get turned back into an oil and gas producer is if a pretty young lady, such as yourselves, gives me a kiss." So one of the girls stooped down and picked up that frog and looked at it and stuck it in her purse and shut it up. And the other girl said, "Well, why did you do that?" And she said, "Well, I got to believe a talking frog is worth a whole lot more than an oil and gas producer." Well, the sad thing is that I heard that joke first in 1986, and it's too bad that we're still laughing at it today, 30 years later. It has been a tough year in industry. Oil and gas producers and companies that service them have lost 50 to 70% of their revenues, and their employees and associates and their families have had to suffer and endure layoffs and wage cuts in order to lower costs. Prices have rebounded from their low of 26. 26, that means we were netting in Kansas somewhere around $18 a barrel, below most people's cost to produce. Finally, the price of oil rose back to 50, and we're all feeling pretty good. And then, boom, Brexit came, and things went downhill from there. So now we're back into the low 40s, and these prices will continue the pain and continue to keep completion and drilling at a near standstill. There is some good news. I read recently that the IEA has put out a statement that they believe between July and September that global oil production of crude oil is likely to lag behind demand by 1 million barrels a day. And I believe this will put a floor on the price, and that we'll slowly grow from there and be able to get back and slowly be able to start drilling some more wells. But the real question out there is, well, how far will it go up? And that will determine on at what price the shale producers will start to open the spigots again and start drilling. And we'll just have to wait and see where that is. Keep in mind that 1 million barrels a day sounds good, but I saw recently that today we have 3 billion barrels of excess of storage in the world today. Now, I don't know what we're supposed to have, but 3 billion is a lot. In 1 million barrels a day, it's going to still take a while to drop that down. However, we are a resourceful industry and a resilient industry in that, and we will recover and grow as prices recover and rebound. And they have to. The world needs oil and natural gas. And there's 7 billion people out there who are trying to move themselves up on the economic ladder, and the only way they can do that is with oil and natural gas. And as we struggle to survive, and we cut costs, and we lay people off, and we cut wages, the Obama administration is doing everything it can to raise our costs through unnecessary and costly regulations. And he even pursued a $10 a barrel tax. This is a time when we're barely staying alive, and he decides to put out there and propose a $10 a barrel tax. And I think he knows what he's doing. They seem intent on putting us out of business, just like they're successfully putting many coal producers out of business. So in addition to dealing with low prices, we have to spend our precious time fighting these regulatory attacks against our industry, when we really need to be spending time trying to save and rebuild our businesses. You would think President Obama would be more appreciative of the benefits he and the country have received from the oil and natural gas boom in the U.S. In all likelihood, the president was reelected because of the huge job growth in our industry prior to his election, for his reelection, and and also the reduction in the carbon footprint, which the president bragged about at the Paris Climate Summit, is largely due to the increase of clean-burning, low-cost natural gas that's replaced coal. But instead of being appreciative of our industry, he is in a full-court press before the end of his term to do as much damage, to put as many regulations, burdens, and obstacles to our survival before he leaves office. If only the public could get the facts on the monumental negative effects of these policies, which will shut down oil and gas production, eliminate more jobs, and raise the cost of all products and services that use energy. But the facts will not be made known as long as our mainstream media is more interested in promoting an agenda than reporting the facts, promoting an agenda than reporting the facts. One thing I have learned after close to a year as chairman of this great organization is that the number of issues that we are monitoring and fighting are huge. And as soon as one gets resolved and under control, two more pop up. I do not see this letting up until we get someone in the White House who understands the importance of our industry to the well-being of the U.S. economy and takes a realistic view of the cost of regulations to their benefits. The president and the press refuse to weigh the tremendous known benefits of fossil fuels to the unknown future effects of CO2 based on computer models that to date have not been very accurate, and the huge cost to the U.S. economy to try to suppress CO2. There are so many challenges KIOGA is facing that I can't begin to address them, and I encourage you to read the newsletter, the bi-monthly newsletter, because Ed does a fantastic job of telling us all the things that we need to worry about. But I would say that the biggest regulatory target on our radar is the regulation of methane emissions for new and modified wells issued May 12th, to which the EPA has now decided to add existing oil and gas wells, and including marginal wells, which they had previously had exempt. And KIOGA will keep a close watch on this issue because it could be very costly to the industry to implement and could greatly shorten the economic life of wells or cause them to be plugged early. KIOGA has joined 18 other state associations to challenge the EPA methane rules. And I also want to thank Kansas Attorney General Derek Schmidt for agreeing to have Kansas join in the lawsuit with several other states against the EPA regarding the methane emissions regulations. With all our challenges, we do have a few successes. After a long fight by KIOGA and many other affected parties, as the governor was stating, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service removed the lesser prairie chicken from the endangered species list. The U.S. House passed the Sunshine for Regulatory Decrees and Settlement Act, which will take important steps to stop the abusive practice known as sue and settle. Repeal of the trade restrictions on U.S. oil exports, opening up markets to producers, and I believe narrowing the gap between the price of Brent and WTI, which at one time was at $20, and now is around $2.50. The EPA report, there's an EPA report put out that found no evidence that hydraulic fracturing has any systemic groundwater impacts. So all this talk about how bad fracking is, the EPA has said, not true. U.S. Supreme Court grants stay of EPA to the Clean Power Act. Nationwide stay issued against EPA on the waters of the U.S., WATAs. And that is basically trying to give government, EPA, more control over land. We all know, initially they were giving control over navigable waters. Well, we all know navigable waters, you think of it as something you put a boat in and navigate. Well now, and this is Ed's statement himself, he said now they want to regulate everything that can float a toothpick. And that's just about everywhere. And also the BLM hydraulic fracturing rule struck down. I want to add now that the main reason KIOGA is doing such a great job staying on top of these issues and working with both our state and U.S. representatives is the hard work of our president, Ed Cross, who does an outstanding job meeting with our congressional delegation in Washington to inform them of the importance of these issues and the harm they can cause to our industry, and communicating with all our stakeholders on each of these issues. As the commercial says, you're in good hands with Allstate. Well, we're in good hands with Ed Cross. I want you to know that. We should also be thankful for the strong efforts of our Kansas delegation in Washington, who are leading the charge to resolve these vital issues. Now then, I want to congratulate someone out here, our very own Steve Dillard. I don't know if you all know it, but he's chairman of our Natural Gas Committee. I want to congratulate him for serving as Admiral Windwagon Smith, the 43rd, ambassador of Riverfest this year. And as the official ambassador of Riverfest 2016, Steve visited children in local hospitals, spoke to Wichita civic organizations, and helped to host dozens of events during and after the Riverfest. This has certainly been a great honor for one of our members, so I know Steve's out there somewhere. There he is. Thank you. All right, Steve. Admiral. I also want to thank our immediate past chairman, Tim Scheck, whose shoes I considered hard to fill, for his hard work and dedication to KIOGA and our industry during his 2-year term, and still continuing today to support our industry, including his efforts to organize the field trip for Governor Brownback to Russell, Kansas, to get a close look, for him to take a close look at what it takes to drill and complete a well. And also for organizing the Oil and Gas 101 Education Seminar in Russell, Kansas, for the Russell, Hayes, and surrounding area economic development and county tax folks so they can learn exactly what it takes to produce oil. I don't think very many of them know anything about it. You stick a straw in the ground and out comes the oil. I think they're there. I also want to thank this year's mid-year meeting chairman, John Francis, and all his volunteers in Great Bend for all their time and effort in hosting a great meeting. I also want to thank Kelly Raines for ensuring a well-run meeting that everyone could enjoy. We had a very good turnout given the state of the industry, and Great Bend was an excellent venue for our meeting. I also want to put a plug in here for the Kansas Oil and Gas Museum in Great Bend. They have a new director, and we were able to take a tour out there, and it's really good. And if you haven't been there, you should go back. You should go see it. If you haven't been for a while, go back and see it. Also, we have a great Kansas Oil Museum in El Dorado. And if you haven't been there, you should make sure to put that on your list of things to go see. Now, another thing, we have potential electricity rate increases are becoming a serious issue for producers. Obviously, that can make up as much as 30 to 50% of our operating expense is electricity. And Adam Barron, chairman of our Electric Power Committee, has been putting tremendous amount of time and effort into getting utility companies to come to the table and seriously debate the negative effects of higher electric costs, both to the producers and to the utilities themselves. I want to thank Adam for all his hard work and time spent in leading this effort. He will be heading a presentation on the status of this issue at one of this morning's seminars. And I want to thank all the convention sponsors, trade show participants, and hospitality suite hosts for their vital contribution, particularly at this difficult time at our convention this year. Please be sure to please be sure to go by all the exhibitor booths out here and see what they have to offer. They have a lot of ways where you can save money and new technologies and show your support and show your thanks for them supporting our event here. I also want to thank Marjorie Nagel, who's this year's convention chair, and her co-chair, Nick Hess, for all their hard work and time putting this great event. And of course, this event would not even come off at all if it were not for our convention coordinator, Kelly Raines, and her assistant, Alicia LaFave. She always does an excellent job running this convention, especially considering this is only our second year here at the Hyatt, and that's obviously a major change when you go and change your venue. I want to thank my wife, Mary Ann, for giving me moral support as I face all the challenges being chairman. And she, as a former copy editor for the Kansas City Star, has been instrumental in helping me with my message from the chairman in KIOGA's newsletter, which I know you all can't wait to get and read every 2 months when it comes out. But by her editing it, she makes me look like I can actually write. And even if you don't read my message, I hope you read the newsletter. It does a tremendous job keeping our members informed on challenges we face, what KIOGA is doing to monitor and tackle those challenges. To conclude, I am proud to be chairman of KIOGA and a Kansas oil producer. We still have many challenges facing our industry, but I am confident that KIOGA, with Ed Cross at its helm, is in a strong position to fight these regulatory and political headwinds. I look forward to working with Ed, our officers and committee chairmen, and our elected officials to stay on top of these issues and keep the political wolves at bay. Thank you. I now want to introduce Marjorie Nagel, our convention chair.
Thank you. I'm honored to be here today and stand before you for the breakfast at our 79th annual convention. First of all, I would like to thank our convention committee, who spent many hours sharing their time, vision, and talents to brainstorm, plan, and finally bring this convention to fruition. My co-chair, Nick Hess, I want to thank you for always being there to offer suggestions and contribute in many important ways. You will make a great convention chair next year, Nick. Steve Anderson of Mull was an advisor on the committee, and he kept us in good spirits, literally and figuratively. Jeff Kennedy also served as an advisor on the committee and stepped up to the plate to put together the Survival Tips panel this afternoon. But there is someone here that I think is very important to acknowledge, and that is the very special, hardworking woman behind the scenes that was really the glue holding us all together, moving us forward and on track while planning this convention, and that is Kelly Raines. Is Kelly here? She's probably somewhere. Is she, Kelly, are you there? Stand up, Kelly. I want to acknowledge you. I would say the best word that describes you, Kelly, is indefatigable, which means untiring. She's a boundless source of energy. Now I'd like to introduce the head table. On my left is Nick Hess, president of Cobalt Energy, who's also the convention co-chair. Russ Wynn of IMA, who I thoroughly enjoyed last year when he served as my mentor, because he chaired the committee last year. Of course, you all know Nick, and we have Ed, and then we have a special guest, Rick Tyler, who's with us. I'd like to thank our major sponsors for giving so generously to the convention this year to ensure its success. Our Wildcatter sponsor is Palomino Petroleum. Is there anyone here with Palomino? Is Clay Watches in the house? Well, he stepped up to the plate again this year, even though he's not here. Okay, would you please stand up? I want to acknowledge Palomino. Our Black Gold sponsor is IMA. Thank you, Russ Wynn and Arlen Beer. Please stand up. Now I'd like to turn this over to Ed Cross, who will introduce our special guests in attendance with us today.
Thank you, Marjorie, and let's give Marjorie a round of applause for her work leading that committee. Right, we have several special guests that have registered for our convention. I don't know that they're all here this morning, but I think they're on the screen behind me. If I'm correct, rolling. We'll be here in a minute. But I do want to talk or mention a few of those. And whenever I mention you, if you would stand either as an individual or as a group, and then at the end we'll give everyone a round of applause. U.S. Senator Pat Roberts. We have U.S. Congressman Mike Pompeo and several of Mike's staff. We have U.S. Congresswoman Lynn Jenkins and her staff, or some of her staff. Kansas State Treasurer Ron Estes. We have some staff members from Senator Moran's office. We have several Kansas State senators. If any of you in the crowd, please stand up. And we have several Kansas State representatives. And I'm not going to name them all. They're all on the screen behind me, but I know I see a few of them over here, and there may be others in the crowd, so please stand up so we know that, yeah, we got here, we got some here, and there's some more over here, so thank you for being here. We have the Kansas Department of Health and Environment Deputy Secretary of Environment, Gary Mason. He was here. Chuck Alderson with the Kansas Department of Commerce. IOGCC Associate Executive Director, Jerry Baker. I don't know if he's here or not. We have lots of folks from Kansas Geologic Survey that are here, as well as KU Tertiary Oil Recovery Project. I don't know if they're in the crowd this morning. The KCC, Kansas Corporation Commission, has a number of folks here from the Oil and Gas Conservation Division, as well as the Pipeline Safety Division and the Utilities Division. Also has some folks here today. We have a number of folks from media. I know American Oil and Gas reporters here. We have K-State Sports Marketing, Jayhawk, IMG Sports, Territorial Magazine. So I know many of you are out here in the crowd as well. The Oklahoma Energy Resources Board, OERB, and the SOER. I think they're sitting back in the back here. We also have from the Silver Lake Baptist Church, we have Jerry Johnson. Used to also work with the Kansas Gas Service, and my pastor, and the pastor of Silver Lake Baptist Church, Darren Johnson. And my daughter, Rachel Cross, is here with us today, along with her friend, Chelsea Stringfellow, are sitting over here as well. And before we give a round of applause, I too want to give my thanks to Kelly Raines and her assistant, Alicia LaFave. You know, anytime you have an event that goes without a hitch, there's someone behind the scenes that's doing a lot of work to make that happen. And you know, what's amazing is not only is this convention that way, but it seems like it's that way every year. And you know, that's just a testament to the hard work and the quality of person that Kelly and her staff is. So with that, and of course Marjorie with our committee, let's give a round of applause to all of our special guests. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, which I think we're all looking forward to hearing what he has to say. I asked him earlier if he's got all the answers to what's going to happen in the election, because I know that's what everybody is waiting to hear about. So, not to put any pressure on you, Rick, but Rick Tyler is a co-founder of Foundry Strategies, a political, strategic, and communications consulting firm specializing in helping their political and corporate clients reach their leadership potential by honing their communication skills. He's currently a political analyst for the MSNBC cable news network. As a national spokesman and communications director for Cruz for President, Rick was a senior member of Senator Ted Cruz's 2016 campaign team. Before joining the Cruz for President campaign, Rick was an executive with the Strategy Group Company, an award-winning nationally recognized politically advertising and media placement firm. In the 2012 election cycle, Rick served as senior advisor and spokesman for Winning Our Future, a pro-Newt Gingrich for President super PAC. As a member of the senior leadership team, Rick provided strategic advice on all aspects of the effort to help Newt Gingrich secure the Republican nomination for president. Prior to joining the PAC, Rick was a key member of the former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich's team for more than a decade, serving as Gingrich's advisor and spokesman. Rick has led a political education and training programs for federal, state, and local candidates and political activists. As lead trainer for GoPAC and trainer for the Leadership Institute, Rick has trained hundreds of candidates, their staffs, and volunteers to lead successful campaigns for elected office in 26 different states. Rick has been invited to speak about his political insights by many conservative groups, committees, and state legislative caucuses. He was a guest lecturer at both the Institute of Politics at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and the Robert J. Dole Institute for Politics at the University of Kansas. A gifted communicator, Rick has been heard on numerous national and local radio shows and has appeared in hundreds of times on national television shows, including MSNBC, Fox News Channel, CNN, CBS, NBC, ABC, PBS, CNBC, CBN, Bloomberg News, BBC, and Al Jazeera. Rick was a contributing author to the New York Times bestseller, Real Change, From the World That Fails to the World That Works, and the bestseller To Save America, both by Newt Gingrich. He's also the project manager for Speaker Gingrich's book on health care called Saving Lives and Saving Money. So let's give it up for Rick Tyler, see what he has to say.
Thanks, Ed. Good morning. Come on, you can do better than that. I know a lot of you were on the 6th floor last night. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think some are still there. I was really delighted to see we had pork, bacon, and sausage. I heard you had turkey last year, and if we had turkey, I wasn't coming. So that was a big improvement. So good job on that. So I am Rick Tyler. I work for former Speaker of the House, Newt Gingrich. I am arguably the most conservative commentator on MSNBC. It doesn't say a lot, does it? But give us a try. So I wanted to start with a couple things. What does EPA stand for? Is that Environmental Protection Agency? I thought it was End Prosperous America. Okay. All right. I'm glad we cleared that up. It is really great to be here with you this morning. I'm honored to be here. It's great to be, I am from Washington, and I'm here to help. You hear that a lot? Actually, it's wonderful to spend time with people who actually do meaningful work. I wanted to start out, my family has two nicknames for me. One is Forrest Gump, and I'll explain this a little bit, and the other one is Mr. Magoo. Anybody remember Mr. Magoo? Mr. Magoo was a cartoon character when I grew up. And Mr. Magoo didn't wear his glasses, and he stumbled from sort of event to event, sort of blindly, but everything always worked out for him, right? And so why does my family call this? Well, I'll give you one example. We just got back from Europe. My daughter was studying overseas in England. My wife and I went to France. We did all the Normandy sites, which is really wonderful. And we had brought the car back to the wrong rental car place. And when we realized that, they said, no, your car needs to be delivered back to Chambord, which was an hour and a half away. And so it was a Hertz rental car, and we said, well, can we just leave it here? But then my wife said, no, look at the ferry tickets. They're out of Chambord too. So this was a real problem because we had an hour and a half to get to Chambord, and the ferry was leaving in exactly 2 hours. So we got back in the car, and we drove like hell to Chambord. So we get to Chambord, and then we got to we got to get gas, right? Now in Europe, here when you fuel, right, you can't put a diesel into the unleaded, right? Well, guess what? In France, you can. And so I ended up putting unleaded gas in a diesel car, and it's going along just fine. I'm thinking, wow, this gas is really expensive here, and this is equivalent to about $5 a gallon. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking down, as you do, when you're pumping gas, you're waiting for it to do, and I look at this big sign. It says right on the flap that opens the thing, and it says diesel. And I said, oh, no. So I stopped. Luckily, I only got about 8 liters in there. And then I switched and put the diesel in there and hoped that the car would run, and it ran fine. And then we finally got back to the rental car place, and it took a little while. Then we had to get a taxi to take us over to the ferry. And so my wife doesn't like travel with me because, some of you may know people like me. I'm the last person on the plane, like every time. Like they shut the door behind me. It's just, you hate people like that because they just make your life miserable because it's a high level of stress all the time. And I learned what I realized about it is because I used to go when I went on TV. I've been on TV hundreds of times, and I'm always late. And I'm like running up. They do the makeup, the whole thing, and I'm like they're running to the chair. They're putting the microphone on me, putting the ear, and it's always like. But I realized why I do this. I was addicted to the adrenaline rush. And somehow in the adrenaline rush, my synapses, I seem to be better. So what I tried to figure out is how to replicate the adrenaline rush without it putting everybody through hell. So there we are. The taxi finally shows up, takes us to the ferry, and we get in the ferry terminal. Now, keep in mind, this boat holds about 1,000 people. It's going to go across to the English Channel over to Portsmouth. And we got in the terminal. There's nobody in the terminal. I mean, nobody. And I walked up to the desk and said, "Hi, we're here to get on the ferry." And she abruptly said, "Well, you better run." So we ran, of course, with my family and the bags and everything else. And the customs people were very nice, and they checked our bags very quickly, and we got on this bus. And then my wife gives me that look, like, "I can't believe you would do this to us." And I said, "Yeah, but honey, wait. You see, because the French Rick Tyler is going to get on this bus." And sure enough, within 3 minutes, another French guy with his family got on, and his wife is angry with him, and there he is. That's me in France, right there. So Forrest Gump and Mr. Magoo, they've now shortened it to just Forrest Magoo. Being here at this conference reminded me of another Forrest Gump experience I had. It was when I worked for Newt Gingrich. We had this project was called American Solutions, and one of the things we worked on was energy. Energy was a big deal, and this was leading up into the 2008 election. So 2006, 2007, we're talking about energy. I don't know if any of you remember Drill Baby Drill, or Drill Here, Drill Now. That was all coming out of American Solutions and Newt Gingrich. And I did the communications. I wasn't a policy person, so I didn't know a whole lot about energy and drilling. And well, one day, the Florida Chambers of Commerce, right, they call, and they want somebody to come to Florida and to debate lifting the ban on drilling offshore in Florida, right? Because drilling is illegal offshore in Florida, mostly because they're concerned about their sandy white beaches, right? So you can imagine this. So the reason they called us, they couldn't find anybody who was willing to take the pro-drilling side. Even our policy people said, "No way, I'm touching that. I'm not doing that." And I said, "Well, I'll go." So you can imagine this, I'm going to go to Florida, and I'm going to debate lifting the ban on drilling offshore in Florida in front of all the chambers of commerces, right? So everybody thought I was insane. Well, I was getting ready to leave one day. This is the day before this is actually 2 days before the debate. And I was leaving the office, and a colleague of mine, a very good friend of mine, Vince Haley, hands me this binder. It looks like Nick's binder here. It was maybe a little thicker. It's about a 4-inch binder. But it was this thing. And he hands it to me, and he says, "Rick, you might want to just take this with you and maybe just glance at it before you go in this debate." Now, the last thing I want to do is go to Denton Beach, Florida, which has sandy white beaches, if you've ever been there, because I wanted to go hang out on the beach and then do the debate and then come home. And so I said, "I don't want to carry this binder to Florida." And he says, "No, really, you really should take it." So I did. So the next day I fly to Denton Beach, Florida, and I get in my hotel room, and I'm getting all ready to go out to the beach. And just as I'm leaving the hotel room, there's this stupid binder sitting on the desk, staring at me. And I just stared at it, and I picked it up, and I took it with me. So I got all settled on the beach, and I started to just skim through it. And then I started to read every page, like page after page after page. I literally read the whole book all the way through. It was fascinating. It was like all these things about drilling. So the next day, I prepared my talk against my opponent. And I had an outline just like this, what I talked from, just, two-sided 8.5, fold in half. My notes, these are the points I was going to make, and I had 20 minutes. So they decided I was going to go first. So I go first and I make all my presentation notes. And I talk about things about all the new revenue streams, all the money that could come into the government because of more drilling offshore. And they could pay for things like education and their new infrastructure projects that they had. And it was going to be really great. And I talked about the limited impact, the environmental impacts, and how safe drilling was, and all these things. I talk about oil independence. I talk about American prosperity. And I thought it went really well. Then as I was returning to my seat, this professor who had a PhD, she was my opponent. And she came right up to me as we were crossing paths. So I was going to sit down and she was going to give her 20-minute presentation. And she looked me right in the eye and she says, "I'm going to refute every single one of your points." That scared the crap out of me. I thought, you know, Forrest, you really did it this time. You're arguing with a woman who has a PhD in this industry, and she knows her stuff, and you are going to look like a fool. But then something really interesting happened. She had a PowerPoint presentation, and her PowerPoint presentation literally followed my talk point for point for point in the same order. And so at first I was kind of scared about that, but then I realized something. She had actually made us equal because she was responding to every single one of my points. And worse for her, she was on defense. And so here's a woman with a PhD, and she had lent me all of her credibility. And so on the stage, we were equal. So she was right about refuting my points. She went after them one after the other. But the problem was she was on defensive. And then the moderator came up, and I said, okay, well, in politics, you always think if you don't know your topic as well as your opponent, head for the mountaintops, right? That means use visionary statements. Don't let them drag you down into the weeds. If they drag you down in the weeds with their industry that they know, they're going to clean your clock. So it kind of went like this. She said, "We found elevated levels of toxins around oil drilling sites." And they would say, "Mr. Tyler, how do you respond?" And I said, "Well, the chemicals that the professor talks about are chemicals that are commonly found with the presence of human beings." And they said, "Professor?" And she said, "Well, that is true." And I said, "Well, but we found all these elevated levels of mercury in the bottom of the ocean during the drilling sites. Mr. Tyler, how do you respond?" She said it poses a danger to the food chain. And I said, "Well, the type of mercury that she talks about really isn't easily absorbed in the bottom dwelling and shellfish, and therefore poses little risk to the food chain." "Professor?" Well, that is true, and this kind of went on for question after question after answer after answer after answer. And I learned all this from a stupid 4-inch binder. And what was kind of amazing was, even though I really wasn't an expert in the field, the wonderful thing about the political world is it always offers opportunities, right, to learn new things. And the second thing that's important is I was willing to engage in the fight. And so this was not a sympathetic crowd, yet I had literally won the debate. I mean, we probably drew even, but I should have been creamed in that debate, and I wasn't. So the other story I wanted to tell you real quickly was a story that came from the Ted Cruz campaign. Our campaign manager is Jeff Rowe, brilliant guy, great strategist, lives from Kansas City, Missouri, has one of the largest Republican consulting firms in the country. I hadn't really known Jeff before the campaign, and I got to know him. He was the one who decided I was ultimately going to be hired, and then I had to go and meet Ted Cruz. But so Jeff tells this story, and it's largely true. It's one of those stories about being late all the time. We're at the Iowa state headquarters for Cruz for President, and we had just so many volunteers. It was just unbelievable. So we had this huge volunteers, and Glenn Beck showed up that day, so he was making phone calls for the campaign. And so we had literally hundreds of volunteers in the campaign headquarters. All the news stations were there. Everybody was reporting live out of our campaign headquarters. And Jeff had been there all morning, and Jeff was actually, he likes to walk the walk, talk the talk, walk the walk. So he was actually making phone calls himself. He was on the phone calling voters, trying to convince them to vote for Ted Cruz. But I could see, he was getting antsy. He was kind of pacing around. He was ready to go back, back to his hotel and work. And so he looks at me, and I was getting antsy too, because I was getting ready to do a hit on MSNBC. And a hit, I don't know if a hit means, appear on television. I don't know if you know that. But so I was getting ready to do a hit on MSNBC, and so Jeff Jeff looks at me and says, where are you going? I said, well, I got to head back downtown. I got to hit. And he goes, oh. And I said, do you want to go? I was hoping he wouldn't say yes, but he said, yeah, I'll go. So I actually rented a car, but for Mr. Magoo, things work out, right? So instead of getting the car that I rented, Mr. Tyler, we're out of the cars that you rented. That's always a good sign. So they bumped me up to this four-wheel drive, it was a four-door F-150 pickup truck. I mean, a monster, beautiful truck. And so, of course, I know what Jeff's going to say. He walks up to the truck and he goes, is this yours? And I said, yeah. He goes, you rented this? And I said, well, yeah. Well, now Jeff weighs about 400 pounds, so it was a good thing that I had this truck because he wouldn't have fit in the other car that I had. So he climbs up in the truck and he goes, why did you rent this truck? And I said, well, I told him the story. He's like, look, I rented a regular car. They didn't have it, and they gave me this truck. And he goes, oh, okay. So we got in the truck, and my hit is at about 310, and right now it's about 230. So we get in the truck, and we start going. And I have this GPS. Do you have this GPS, the one that yells at you like, take a left? I have this other voice. There's lots of voices you can put in GPS. You know that. You can change them to English accent, British accent, Australian accent. I have one that's jihad accent, and it kind of says, this is infidel. At the next corner, take a left. When I kill you. I've got drunk GPS too. That was pretty funny. Driving down the road and it goes, ugh. And about 400. Never mind. Or sometimes it says, turn right, turn right, turn right. And you're like, what? Beer store. So, I have this other GPS voice. It's the one I put in the car when my wife is driving with me. She drives, you husbands, when you drive with your wife. And my wife says, honey, you're driving too fast. GPS. I love the way you drive. Honey, you're following too close. I love the way you follow too close. You're a really good driver. So that one's good. You got to get that one. That was really good. So I have this GPS that yells at me, and Jeff, he likes things calm, and it's getting kind of hostile. And I'm driving fast because I need to get there because I'm running late, right? So we pull on this road, and I miss the turn, and we have to go back around on the exit the other way. That will ruin Jeff's whole day, right? Just the fact that we missed a turn. And then we're pulling onto the on-ramp, and I'm trying to pull in, and there's two semi-tractor trailers like this. So they're creating this wall, and I can't get in. Now, people usually have two responses to this. It's fight or flight, right? So the one response is you would slow down, right, and get behind the tractor trailer, behind you. And then the other response is to gun it and get in front of the first tractor trailer, right? And so those are the two personalities, right? And not me. I want to know all the options, and I want to assess the situation. So we stay right next to these tractor trailers for quite a long time. And Jeff can see that the lane is running out, in about several hundred yards to a quarter of a mile. But, lines in the road are just sort of options. I know there's a breakdown lane, and it's not going to be a problem, right? So I eventually decide I'm going to gun it, and we head right into the breakdown lane, and then I pass the truck, going on the breakdown. You'll see me, listen, don't start. I've been on Kansas roads already today, so, So we get in, so that ruins his whole day. And then we get all the way downtown. Now, I think in my mind, I know where this hit is, because MSNBC has been broadcasting at the top of the Iowa Museum. Iowans love to show off their state, so they have lots of museums about their state. So I went to the museum, and we parked the car, and we go up in the elevator, we get off on the wrong floor. Janitor says, you don't want to be on this floor, but the next floor is to get back. So that's ruining Jeff's day too, and he's rolling his eyes. We get to the top floor, we're there, people are milling around. It doesn't look like they're doing anything live there, so I get myself a cup of coffee, and it's getting to be about 10 minutes of 3. And Jeff is getting really anxious, and he goes, well, shouldn't you ask someone? I said, yeah, I guess so. So are you doing a MSNBC hit here today? And people are like, no. And I was like, oh no. And he's like, okay, so what do we do now? So we get back in the truck, and we start to drive really slow, like 25 miles an hour. And I'm getting on the phone, and I called Hallie Jackson. Now, Hallie Jackson works, she's a colleague of mine at MSNBC, and she was an in-bed reporter for our campaign. So I knew her, and I knew that she would know where the MSNBC hit would be. So I called her, and she said, I don't know where it would be. So I was going 25, now I'm going 15, because I don't want to progress too far in the wrong direction. So we started to move. And then all of a sudden, Hallie calls back, and she says, I know where it is. And I said, okay, I owe you one, meaning I got to give her an exclusive on something. And Jeff's like, oh, this is how this works, right? So she gives me directions, and so I gun it. Now we're doing about 65 and a 25, when all of a sudden, this, I would say, a group of teenagers, and they were probably, young girls, and this one girl, her hair came down on the side of her head like this, and she was looking at her phone, and she walked right into the middle of the road, like literally in front of the truck. And so I literally had to swerve to miss her. And I said, I can't even think about that right now because I have a daughter of my own, right? And so then, now Jeff is over the top apoplectic. We finally get to the place, and I parked the truck, and I put him in a snowbank. But so I can get out on my side. He's got to get out. He looks like an elk on ice, trying to navigate this, and so he says, go, 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 and I'm like, I can't, I gotta, he's my boss. I'm like, I'll wait for you. Can you grab my hand? So he finally gets out, and we get up to the security desk, and I said, Rick Tyler, oh, we don't have you on the list. And so, of course, I talk my way through, and then I got to talk Jeff's way through, and so he lets us in. And then I finally see the producer, and it's in a room like this, actually, and they had the stanchions up, and they're doing the show up top, and I can see they're doing the show, and Chris Jansen's doing the show, and I'm in the right place. I got it. It's 5 minutes. It's 5 minutes past 3, so I got 5 minutes. And so the producer comes down, and she goes, oh, hi, Rick. I don't have you in the lineup today. And Jeff's like, oh, my gosh, this is unbelievable. And sitting there is Tad Devine, who was one of Bernie Sanders' chief guys, and Ben Ginsberg. And they've already got their IFBs, the little thing that goes in your ear, and they're all mic'd up, and they're ready to go, and they're all sitting there. And all of a sudden, the producer says, but it looks like we can take you, like right now. So I walk past them, go on, do the show exactly at the time I said I would, all right? So that's just a little idea of how things work for me. So the first time I met Ted Cruz was sort of similar. We met in a townhouse very near Capitol Hill, and we're going to meet at a certain time. I had gone through all the rounds of interviews, and they wanted to hire me. I just had to meet Ted and make sure I got along with Ted, and if I got along with Ted, I was going to get the job. So I'm waiting at this townhouse near Capitol Hill, and he's got some votes or whatever, and I understand senators run late. They always do. I see you've got a lot of congressmen lined up here, too, so I hope that works out for you all. So they're always running late. So he was late, and so I waited. And the more I waited, right, the more anxious and nervous I became. So about an hour passed, and I'm really, starting to feel insecure, like, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know what made you ever think you could work for a presidential campaign. Who would ever think you could speak for Ted Cruz? I mean, all these insecurities, right? And then I have to go to the bathroom, So I decide, well, all right, I'll go to the bathroom. So I go in the bathroom, and just as I'm in there, I hear all this commotion. I'm like, great, the senators showed up, right? So his entourage comes in, I hear all these people, and there goes my opportunity to make a good first impression, right? So I come out of the bathroom. Oh, by the way, someone had forgotten to replenish the towels, so I came out with clean but wet hands. And who's standing there but wants to use the bathroom but Ted Cruz, right? So I awkwardly stick out my soaking wet hand and introduce myself and shake and think, okay, how bad could this be? So then I wandered down to the conference room where everybody else was, and he is using the bathroom. And then he comes back to the room, and then somebody tries to introduce us, right? And so we both explain sort of at the same time, no, we've already met in the bathroom. And everybody kind of laughed. And that reminded me of a Winston Churchill joke, which sort of foolishly I decided to tell. But it turned out that Ted Cruz was and is a student of Churchill. He studied Churchill. Like, he read all of Churchill's books that he wrote, read all his biographies, including the one by William Manchester, which is a great 3-volume series. And so for the next 20 minutes, we traded jokes and stories on Churchill. So we hit it off. So it was kind of interesting because I didn't expect to like Ted Cruz. Why? Well, because I'd read all the media about Ted Cruz, and I was told that people aren't supposed to like Ted Cruz, which is sort of interesting. I've always gotten along with people that everybody wasn't supposed to like. But I really did like Ted Cruz, and he exceeded my expectations. And so over the next 12 months, we traveled all over the country together. I think we did at least 25 different states. And it was usually just me and him and Bruce. Bruce was his body guy. So if you ever saw a picture of Ted Cruz on the campaign trail, you'll see the same guy standing next to Ted. That's Bruce's body guy. If you don't know what a body guy is, I can explain to you later. It's basically the person to make sure everything goes well for Ted Cruz. Not necessarily a bodyguard, but it's just someone who helps out. So I really got to know him. And he really exceeded my expectations. And politics is almost entirely about expectations, right? It's about meeting expectations. I also learned this from the hospitality business. You always, and you know, as entrepreneurs and people who service customers, you know that if you, I always learn by promise nothing, deliver everything, right? So you got to promise some things. But the problem is, if you promise nothing and deliver everything, you're terrific, you're great, everybody loves you, right? But if you promise everything and you can't deliver on the smallest detail, they're going to eat you alive. Isn't that right? You customer service people know what I'm talking about. So anyway, I got along with Ted Cruz. So I want to go through a little bit of the strategy of the campaign. Then I'll try to explain the best that I can. Somehow it's my job to explain this election. I'm not sure I'm up to the task yet, but I will try my best to explain it. So let me just give you our strategy and what we thought it was and how it would be. So the first thing is we know that the country wanted what? An outsider, right? Everybody, because there's so much mistrust. I mean, mistrust of Washington has always been there. You know that, right? Since 1980, you mentioned 1986, Nick, and I'm sure people were as mistrusting as Washington, D.C. as they've ever been. But it's sort of different today. And one of the things Nick and I were talking about, your chairman, earlier, and he brought up a very interesting point, and it's absolutely true, is the country is divided. And it's divided for several reasons. One, it's divided because in Congress, true power is at hand. So before 1994, my former boss, Newt Gingrich, the Republicans haven't been in charge in 40 years. They hadn't been in charge they haven't controlled both the House and the Senate since the 1920s and 1994. That changed. No one saw it coming. There's literally 4 people in the country who saw it coming. On election night in 1994, no one would have predicted that the Republicans would win the House and the Senate. So we got real change. And it's gone back and forth, right, ever since then. So real power is at stake. Now, Republicans take politics almost sort of like a hobby. Democrats, it's life and death, right? I mean, it's just like, that's the level of commitment to winning on the Democrat side and the Republican side, in my opinion, in my observation. So real power is at stake. The second is the way we consume media. So if you look at Democrats and Republicans, or Republicans, conservatives and liberals, it's not just the media we consume. What do I mean by that? So you can wake up every single morning as a conservative, right, and never hear a liberal point of view, ever. You can watch certain shows, you can read certain publications, you can listen to Limbaugh, Hannity, and others, Levin, who I like. And just never hear a liberal point of view at all, ever. And you can wake up every day as a liberal and never hear a conservative point of view, right? So you're literally you're talking to people who agree with you all the time. Now, I like to listen to across the board all different kinds of points of view. And I'll tell you a secret about, how to be effective in communication and politics is it's centered around the story. And what do I mean by that? People who learn to tell a story tend to be much more effective in politics because they're controlling the narrative. And why is that? It's because people, let's take Limbaugh, who's great, love Limbaugh, he considered himself an entertainer. He's also conservative and highly educated. We don't have a lot of entertainers on the right. We literally don't. Like all the comedians, you might name 1 or 2 conservatives that are funny, but most of the comedians who are funny are on the left, right? You all agree with that? So you have Limbaugh, who is what we call opinion radio, right? Love opinion radio, but a lot of people don't. And a lot of Republicans don't like opinion radio. So what do they listen to? Any guesses? When they're in the car, they got to listen to something. They might listen to CDs or MP3s or whatever. They listen to NPR. So NPR Morning Edition combined is an audience of almost 25 million people combined. Limbaugh is about half of that. So Limbaugh, you can compare to either one of those shows. And people say, Rush dominates talk radio, and he does, there's no question about it, except NPR. And you notice what NPR does very, very well. They tell magnificent stories, high quality. They use the use of sound, and they always do. If you listen to them, they do sort of the same thing. Now, I know a lot of you. There's probably some Republicans out here who listen to NPR, and they're thinking, "Well, I know they're kind of center left, but I can inoculate myself from that." Well, maybe to a degree, but when everything you're listening to is all center left, I don't hear a lot of center right opinions on National Public Radio, but I hear great stories, and so the left has really learned to tell a story. Now, why is a story important? Well, one, God told the story in the Bible. The Bible is all stories, right? Because he figured we could remember it that way. And that's key because people remember stories. And they can go home and they can retell them. They can't remember statistics. They can't remember talking points. But they can remember a great story. The conservatives have done really not a very good job of telling stories. The left has done an unbelievable job of telling stories. And now, where do stories usually hit? See, now, with me, like, I want to know the data and the facts. So it's like, when we hit intellectually, maybe a lot of you are the same. We gotta think about it and then make a choice. But that's not how most people think. Most people are hit here. They're hitting the heart first. And if you convince the heart, then the mind will follow, right? As opposed to the minority of people where they kind of intellectualize it first, and then maybe they'll think about it with their heart, or maybe they won't at all. But we have not done a good job of really telling our story. So with the Ted Cruz campaign, what we decided to do is, since I figured out that when people meet Ted Cruz, they like Ted Cruz. Now that kind of came as a shock to a lot of people, but when people got to know Ted Cruz, so we wanted to meet as many people as possible. And so you have Iowa, South Carolina, and New Hampshire. We knew we weren't going to win New Hampshire, but what we wanted to do is win an early state and place in the other two. We accomplished that goal. But then what happened was on March 1st, you had the whole southern states vote. So Georgia, Alabama, Tennessee, Oklahoma, and the senator's home state of Texas. We figured if we could raise enough money, which we did, because we were going to be, remember the race was going to be, as it always is, it was going to be the establishment candidate, right? In the past, that's been played by Mitt Romney, Bob Dole, and John McCain, right, the establishment candidate. And then you were going to get an underfunded conservative, and that was always going to be the battle, right? And so we were going to definitely be the conservative in the race, but we were going to be funded. And so we did that. So the first thing we did was we had to prove that we could organize. The second thing we had to do is prove that we could raise money. And we actually talked about with the media all the time raising money and how much money we were raising and who we were raising it from. We told a lot about, most candidates don't want to talk about how much money you're raising, and they don't talk about strategy. We talked about them all the time because we needed to convince the elite media that we were a real campaign. And by the way, all the reporters that they put with us, I liked all the reporters we had, but they weren't, what the media likes. They weren't their top shelf reporters. They were sort of like, cover Ted Cruz for a while, he'll crash and burn. It's interesting because Katie Tur works for MSNBC. She's actually the London correspondent. Did you know this? I don't know if any of you watch MSNBC, but she is the London correspondent, and she was put on the Trump campaign because MSNBC had seemed to me calculated, no one told me this, but it seemed to calculate, oh, Katie, come back from London, cover Trump for a few weeks, it'll be over, and then you can go back to London, right? She is still following the Trump campaign, right, to this day. So what we decided to do was get Ted Cruz to meet as many people as possible. And one of the things we wanted to do was outwork our opponents. We typically did 3, 4, and 5 events a day. We found out our opponents were doing 1, 2, and 3 events a day, so that wasn't too hard. But they had a different strategy. So, for instance, Marco Rubio and a lot of the other candidates, what they would do is they would do a lot of the talk cable networks. But when you're doing 4 events a day and 5 events a day, you can't do that. So we sacrificed that. We didn't do the cable TV networks as much. We went out and met voters. And that paid off in Iowa, and we won Iowa. We came in 3rd, ironically, in New Hampshire, where I grew up. And, Ted Cruz, Texan, conservative in New Hampshire, not a real great fit, but we placed 3rd there. We did okay, but disappointingly, in South Carolina. Then what we had announced right after the Iowa debate, we were going to go do a a Southern bus tour. We're going to go from South Carolina all the way to Oklahoma City. And it was unbelievable. I'm an optimist. I woke up every day believing we were going to win this campaign. I never believed we weren't going to win. It's just the way I operate. And you kind of have to believe that. But everyone who traveled with us through the South, like, honestly believed we were going to win, because thousands of people would show up at every single event. And these were events. People would bring their families. And you know, in the South, you know, they line up all their kids by age order, and they would all stick out their hand and say their name and shake Ted Cruz's hand. It was really amazing. But what happened was, all of these strategies, winning money, working harder, meeting all the people, they all worked, except for one thing. You know what it was? Donald Trump. Donald Trump won those Southern folks. You know, he won them over. And I'll tell you what Donald Trump did remarkably well. There's a lot of things I didn't like that he did, and I won't get into them unless you can ask me about them during the Q&A. But what he did is he got up in the morning and sent out a provocative tweet, right? Remember, he would do that. And then he would call into all the cable talk shows in the morning, which is really a key and important because it drives the news. And he understands what to do every morning, every single day to drive the news and make it about him. And he got literally about $2 billion worth of free media news coverage through the cycle. He controlled it, he dominated it, and it was remarkable. Now, a lot of people criticize Ted Cruz for saying, well, why didn't you attack Donald Trump in the beginning, and then you could have beaten him? And that wasn't true, and I'll tell you why. And it's hard to explain in politics, or it's hard to understand, but this is how it works. In politics, you have to go through a critical path, a process in the same order, and if you skip steps, you're going to be in trouble. The first is name ID, right? They have to know your name or they can't vote for you. Second, they have to like you. Third, they have to know what you will live and die for, or what you stand for, what your issues are for. And then finally, they want to know how you contrast with your opponent. If you get that out of order, you're going to lose. And so I'll give you an example. Rick Perry, who's a longest-serving governor of Texas, great guy, he decided after Donald Trump had attacked John McCain, you all remember it, that he was going to stick up for John McCain and stick up for the military, and that was going to be, and Trump hammered him. And the reason is because Trump had about a 98% name ID, and at that time people liked him, and they liked that he was going to stick it to the establishment, stick it to Washington, who was going to change things. And they were like, who's this Rick Perry governor guy who's attacking Donald Trump? And he just got hammered for it. The other thing that inoculated Donald Trump a lot was he's essentially just living out his brand. That is, he could say whatever he wants because we expect Donald Trump to say the things that he wants, and we just say, oh, well, that's Donald. Yet, if another politician, and Marco Rubio actually tried it in one of the debates, he actually tried to go toe-to-toe with Donald Trump, trying to act like Donald Trump, and he got hammered for it. And the reason was because we don't like to see Marco Rubio live out something that he's not. We want people to live out who they are. So he got hammered for it. Then Chris Christie annihilated him, one of his biggest weaknesses, and pointed it out in one of the debates. So just to sum up real quick, we saw the race in bracketology, NCAA basketball. You know how you have divisions and they go down till you get to the final two. And our theory was, in order to advance in the presidential primary, Republican primary, just like NCAA basketball, you got to beat the other team. You got to show a win. And so we basically saw the Republican Party in 4 brackets. So you have the establishment bracket, which is the largest bracket. You have the evangelical bracket, which is the second largest bracket. You had the Tea Party bracket, which is the conservative, non-social, more or less non-social. A lot of these overlap, but the Tea Party bracket, very distinct. Then you had the libertarian bracket, okay? And what was interesting is Ted Cruz was a Tea Party guy. That's how he was elected. He never ran away from the Tea Party, and he wanted to run as a Tea Party conservative. And we thought that a lot of other people would compete in that bracket because Scott Walker had defeated the unions in Wisconsin as governor, and the Tea Party came to his rescue, and we thought that he would be very popular with the Tea Party and was going to compete in that bracket. He didn't. He wanted to be an establishment candidate. Marco Rubio was elected 2 years before Senator Cruz. He got elected by the Tea Party. There's no question about that. He knows it. Rand Paul got elected by the Tea Party at the same time as Senator Rubio. And so all of these people compete with the Tea Party, but none of them did. They just decided they weren't going to compete in the Tea Party bracket, and they were going to compete actually in the establishment bracket. So we were all alone. So by the time we announced, we already won the Tea Party bracket. There was literally nobody left. Maybe Jim Gilmore. I don't know if you remember that he actually ran, but he did actually run. Then we had, so we decided we were going to then compete in the evangelical bracket. Ted Cruz's father's a Cuban refugee. He's a pastor. He's got a great witness story. And so we decided to announce in Liberty University. Now, the reason we picked Liberty University is because we wanted to announce before anybody else, but no one else could know about it. And so the problem, here's the conundrum with announcing presidential campaigns. You want a big room with a lot of people, which means you have to tell a lot of people, right? They're not going to show up. And then the press, then everybody would know that we were going to announce early, and that was going to be a real problem. But Liberty has convocation. They meet every Wednesday, and the whole auditorium is filled with 10,000 students who are sympathetic to Ted Cruz. He had been there before. And so we announced at Liberty with this huge crowd that was all waving flags and shouting Ted Cruz, and it worked out really, really well. And it put us in a competitive, in the evangelical bracket, which now has Mike Huckabee, Rick Perry, and the one who was really dominating at the time was Ben Carson. Ben Carson sort of lost when his response to San Bernardino was inadequate. And so we began to dominate that bracket. We began to compete with Rand Paul in the libertarian bracket, and the whole idea was going to compete with the establishment bracket, which everybody thought, of course, would have to be Jeb Bush, because he had the name. He was a good and actually conservative governor of Florida. He had raised $100 million before he'd even announced with his super PAC, and had all the money and all the establishment candidates behind him. He wasn't even a factor. And then along came Donald Trump. And the reason we didn't attack Trump, because we did a poll in June when Trump began to lead the polls, and we discovered, take a guess how many people, because all the media was saying, if Trump weren't in a race, Cruz would get all these voters. And so we decided to test that. Do you know how many Trump voters in June would go for Ted Cruz as a second choice? 4%. 4%, which told us one thing. Nobody knows who Ted Cruz is, and that was absolutely true. They didn't know, because there was no other dominant second choice. It was kind of all over the place, and we realized everybody knows who Donald Trump is. Nobody knows who Ted Cruz is. Nobody knows who the other people is. So we knew if we attacked Donald Trump, we would get hit, just like Rick Perry did, just like the other candidates who did that did. So as they began to peel off and winnow away, and their fundraising dried up, our fundraising kept going, and we didn't attack Donald Trump until we knew that would make a difference. And part of it was the debates because of Donald Trump. 26 million people watched the first Fox News debate, not because of Ted Cruz, although he was the most Googled candidate in that first debate. What did that tell us? That told us nobody knew who Ted Cruz was. And people watching the debate, hey, honey, who's this senator from Texas? Google his name, find out who he is. They didn't know, but they liked what he said, and we did very well in the debates because we had this big audience. So that's how we got to second place. I just want to close with a couple of notes about your industry. One is, as Nick mentioned, you are under attack. You have been under attack. You will be under attack. And look, I don't want to predict the outcomes of this election, but you ought to prepare for a Hillary Clinton administration no matter what. And I think part of the problem is oil and gas and energy have to tell their story. The left tells their story, and I just looked this up really quickly. The top 14 environmental groups, most of which are dedicated to destroying your industry. Let's be frank about it. Some of them do okay, good work, and others don't, but most of them are dedicated to destroying the oil and gas industry. Their combined assets are $11 billion. They raise average in a year, the top 14, $3 billion a year. Their top executive pay ranges from $190,000 to $960,000 a year. Top executives of environmental groups. So I'm talking about like the Sierra Club, like Greenpeace, like the Wildlife Federation. These groups. Some of them are even more radical. They're smaller. Then you have on the level below that, there's about 200 executives, and their average pay is $550,000 a year. $280,000 a year. So literally every morning, you send Ed out, who wakes up to fight an army of people trying to kill you. It's like literally politics, and probably the story. All stories have a victim, a villain, and a vindicator, right? Every single story, every Bible story, the same thing: victim, villain, and vindicator. And the left has done really well doing their stories. What do they say to describe? And I know a lot of you are small-time producers and you're not big oil, but what do they say about oil executives, right? They say greedy, right? Does that strike you as like strange? And yet I hear, and they talk about, the left talks about this with capitalism all the time. It's like capitalists are greedy. Do you all feel greedy? Here's the interesting thing about greed. What is greed? Well, greed is a 7 deadly sin. You don't want to be greedy. God doesn't like greed, but there's a reason for it. See, greed has no role in the oil industry or capitalism. Why? Because you all know if you're starting a small business, and Nick was telling me about his, you got to push assets away from you as quickly as possible. Greeding is hoarding assets to oneself. Who can build a company by hoarding assets to oneself? You have to push them out, right, in the form of capital investments and human resources. And why? Because you got to take a risk for a return. Now, the left believes that if you take this enormous risk with your money and work hard, hire people, hire the service providers who provide all the equipment that you all use every single day, the left believes that if you actually get a return on that investment, that you should share it. That's nuts. That's not the way it works. No one's going to put anything at risk unless there's a potential for reward, right? And yet the left thinks this, but they get to tell the story. So who's greedy? The people who push assets away from them to create prosperity, or the people are the environmentalists who collect all this money to do one thing, destroy you? And by the way, if I wanted to solve pollution problems, everybody wants a clean environment, right? Do you all want a clean environment? I mean, it's just like, does anybody not want a clean environment? I would focus on one thing. I would make societies prosperous. Sounds simple, right? Sounds simple and almost silly. But it's true. Prosperous societies don't tolerate unhealthy ecosystems, dirty air, dirty water. And if you don't believe it, I can take you to Calcutta, we can go to New Delhi, we can go to Monrovia, we can go to lots of places in the world. In fact, the 25 most polluted places in the world happen to be the 25 most poorest places in the world. Why? Because people don't have resources to clean up the environment. Prosperity cleans up environments. So if the left really wanted to clean up the environment, they would make places prosperous. Yet what do? They want to destroy the vehicle, energy, because you can't have prosperity without energy. Energy does everything to fund the innovations and fund everything we do. We take it for granted. The energy business does a little bit too good of a job, frankly, because I depend on this microphone to work, we depend on the air conditioning to work, we depend on the lights to work, and they just work. And when they don't work, we all kind of freak out. And if you ever read the book 1 Second After, which sort of, it's a fiction book written by Bill Forstchen, and it contemplates what would happen after electromagnetic pulse, EMP. That's a nuclear device going off in the air. We hope these things don't happen. But it would shut out the grid. It gets scary really fast. People die almost immediately. People on dialysis, people in emergency rooms, people who can't get food. Food begins to rot. You can't pump gas. There's no transportation. There's nothing. It gets chaotic very fast. Who keeps that all together? The energy industry. Who's behind the fuel for growth? The energy industry. So why wouldn't any administration want to put energy front and foremost of keeping prosperous societies safe, prosperous, and free? Because they lead to the best and cleanest environments. And so I've taken a little bit more time than I should. I'm going to stop now, Ed, and I thank you very much, and I look forward to your questions. How are we doing questions? I can see people. I don't know if they have microphones. If they don't, you're going to have to speak really loudly.
Convince him, plead and cajole with him to stay on message.
Okay. Yeah, well, the skunk just came to the picnic. Not you, sir. That would be me. My current analysis is I don't see a path for Donald Trump to win. He will win Kansas. He'll win a lot of the red states. And a lot of people have tried. I know Rudy Giuliani has tried. I know Chris Christie has tried. I know Newt Gingrich has tried. I know a lot of people have tried to talk to Donald Trump. And it's not completely irrational because, he beat us, right? I'm standing here beaten by Donald Trump, right? So I understand. He beat 15 other candidates in the primary, and he did it brilliantly with very little money and investment. And he somehow wants to carry over that methodology into the general election, but campaigns are about math, and math means you got to add people, not subtract them. So he could keep his base together, and I suspect that he will. I mean, people, if you've ever been to a Donald Trump rally, they believe in Donald Trump. They really do. But how is he going to expand the map? And the other problem is from a media perspective, it's frustrating for me to watch because Hillary Clinton is the most beatable candidate. It's unbelievable. Anywhere from, and we're used to, and maybe we're a little inoculated from Clinton scandals, but these email scandal in the server, that's a real problem. But just look at the jobs and the economic growth and the lack of prosperity and, frankly, the manipulation of money by the Federal Reserve, which has kept the middle class from actually realizing any meaningful buying power. So the middle class is really struggling. They're struggling to put their kids through college. They haven't been on vacations. Many of them piece together, like my sister. She pieces together several different jobs to make it work. And so I don't know that Donald Trump can change. He's 70 years old. I'm 50. It'd be hard for me to change. So I can imagine at 70, it would be even harder. But the problem is he steps on all of her stories. Now, some people say it's unfair. The media doesn't cover Hillary Clinton. I think to some extent that's true. I think all reporters are biased, but so are you. You're all biased. And I think most reporters that I know that their first bias is for news, and because they want ratings. And Donald Trump makes news, and he makes ratings. The problem is he makes the wrong news, and he ends up stepping on all her stories. And so her story is not getting told. My advice recently, I got so frustrated, I said to MSNBC, if Donald Trump would just shut up for 3 days and not make any news, because the news media has got to make news. It's an industry. They got to make news. And there's lots of news on the Clinton side. And I think that they would cover, they do cover her. They do. They just don't cover her to the extent that Donald Trump gets covered, largely because of ratings. Does that answer your question? Next question. What would I do differently? You know, Ted said in Indiana, I remember I was in Indiana. I was actually on the set in New York City, and I was covering election night in Indiana. And you got the IFB in your ear, and in the control room, your face is on a screen, and people are watching all the directors moving it. And so I got this in my ear. It says, "Rick, are you all right?" I said, "As long as I don't look at Heidi." And the reason was I had just gotten word that Ted was going to drop out, and I could see Heidi on the stage, and every time I looked at her, my eyes would like well up. You know, I was just like cry. I cry over McDonald's commercials, so But I'll be all right as long as I don't look at Heidi. But Ted said in that speech, he said, "We left it all on the field," and I got to believe that's true. I don't know that we would have done anything differently. I think Ted is and continues to be an outsider. People don't like him in Washington because he is an outsider. He didn't drink the Kool-Aid. He doesn't care to get invited to their cocktail parties. He doesn't care to get along with anybody. He's going to represent the 23 million voters of Texas, and that's it. It doesn't matter if people like him. And so they don't like him in Washington. But the people did like him. The problem is Donald Trump successfully put Ted Cruz. It's not hard to do. He's a U.S. senator, right? It's hard to say a U.S. senator is not an insider. But we wanted to be the outsider candidate, and Donald Trump trumped us on that. He became the true outsider candidate. So I don't, there's like marginal things we would have done differently, but I don't think our strategic message was, I think, right. I think the way we did the bracketology, in other words, we wanted to consolidate the three wings of the three brackets of the Republican Party to beat the establishment. That was our path to victory, and Donald Trump came in. I think the way we handled Donald Trump was right, and we made it to second place. But in the end, it wasn't enough to beat Donald Trump. I hope that was somewhat satisfactory. Next question. Yes, sir. We'll see. The question is, the Democrats do tell great stories. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? You tell a story, it's a linear story, and Republicans don't tend to do that. I think we're just kind of wired differently. I think we think more intellectual, and Newt Gingrich certainly represented that wing. Paul Ryan represents that wing, right? So a lot of people are upset with Paul Ryan. I know Paul Ryan well enough to know that what he really believes is that conservative policies will solve all the other problems. So the Republican Party has had an I'll call it an inclusion problem with minorities, African Americans, Asians, and Hispanics, right? The truth is we're the natural home for all three of those groups, and people can argue, I'll argue all day with that. The Republican Party was founded as a freedom party. It's always been a freedom party. And if we ever lose the idea of being a freedom party, that's how it was founded. It was the anti-slavery, abolitionist freedom party. The first 6 of 9 planks in the 1856 platform had to do with civil rights. It's always been a civil rights party. But we don't know our own story. We don't tell our own story, so people don't know it. People think Abraham Lincoln was a Democrat, and they don't know. It's scary. Watch some of these videos that they go to college campuses and ask basic questions like, who won the Civil War? And they don't, what Civil War? You get answers like, we did, the Americans. It's really, it's sort of pathetic. And if we don't if we don't know our story and tell our story, but stories touch emotions that create human lives. You don't want to think about this, but look, the energy industry saves lives every day because nothing's possible without energy. You don't run dialysis machines without energy. You can't operate on the little girl, dying of cancer on the operating table without energy. The person who needs a shot at life needs to drive an old car to get to work, to start the first job. She can do that because of energy, right? We don't talk about those things. We talk about statistics, and so I don't think the statistics move people. They're hard to remember. So we've got to learn to tell stories. And I just think the reason we don't is because we don't think about it in those terms. But we got to get better at it. Anyone else? Way in the back. Yeah, they could. My hope is that if people decide that somehow Donald Trump is unacceptable. Look, the Democrats don't like Hillary either, right? They're much better Republicans in that they're going to fall in line. They just do. They just march dutifully, behind their candidate. Our side, not as much. And Americans really, actually, for as much as they like to talk about getting things done, they really like divided government. And the founders created it that way. They created a brilliant system that's lasted these 300 plus years because no tyrant could ever get hold of the reins. Now, we've had people come close, and people talk about Obama and executive orders, and I think that's dangerous. But the reason it's dangerous is not necessarily what Obama can or can't do. He'll tell you all the things he wished he could do. It is he sets a precedent for the next person and the next person until soon we truly do have an imperial presidency. And so my hope is that people will say, okay, looks like Hillary's going to win, but we got to keep the Senate and the House with Republicans to balance it out. And what they really mean is gridlock, right? And then yet they complain about the gridlock, but yet they really want gridlock. I'm a conservative. I always think, why do we want to get things done in Washington? Like all the things that Washington gets done are really bad, right? Like we should strive to get nothing done, right? That would be better. One more question. Yes, sir. Say, I missed the question though. It depends on their district. So you're now seeing some of the leadership. Well, there's two things. One is political leaders don't want to own some of the things Donald Trump says, right? So they want to create a buffer like, yeah, that's him and I'm me. Now, if their district is very pro-Donald Trump, which I suspect you have several of them here in Kansas, and the people like Donald Trump, and the member decides to distance himself from Donald Trump, they will suffer. So they're going to look at their own poll numbers, right? This is all about self-preservation and power. Let's not forget. Let's not be Pollyannish about this. It's about power and money, right? And so if their polls show that distancing themselves will hurt them, then they won't do that. if they find that distance themselves will benefit them, like Susan Collins in Maine. Susan Collins is arguably the most moderate, I would say liberal, senator in the U.S. Senate on the Republican side. She's not even running for re-election. She's already distanced herself because she knows that that's a popular position that she has with her constituents. So it's really going to be one or the other. But look, a lot of people are saying, how does Donald Trump affect the? I don't think he does. I think he's an anomaly. He's very gifted in many ways. He's especially gifted with the media. But I don't think he defines the party. I think the thing is with the parties, it's been ideologically weak, in my opinion, for a long time. I think the Republican Party should be the conservative party. When people unenroll for the Republican Party, like George Will, it makes me mad. It's like, George, you're going to leave me here with all these other people? Like, get in the party, make it happen. Like, I want the Republican Party to succeed. I want it to be the pro-life party, the pro-capitalism party, the conservative party, and we ought to tell our story like Ronald Reagan did, and we win. So I'm not going to leave the Republican Party, but some days I feel, notionally Republican. And the reason I feel upset about it and strongly about it is, we were told, give us the House and we'll do all these wonderful things for conservatives. No, it didn't happen. And then what we really need is the Senate. Give us the Senate and then we'll do all these conservative things. And all. That didn't happen either. And here's why, and it's really important to understand in a constitutional republic. Newt Gingrich in 1995 didn't look at his caucus and say, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, yeah, I don't have the votes. We'll give Clinton everything he wants, right? He didn't do that. What he did was he engaged the country in a debate and went to the people and made a case, and his principal case at that time was welfare reform. That was his signature achievement. He got welfare reform. 101 Democrats voted for welfare reform, not because they wanted to, because he had won the argument with the country. That's a mark of Thatcherism, win the argument, then win the vote. He had won the argument with the country, and the country told the members, we want welfare reform. If you don't give it to us, we'll find someone who will. They got the message. They voted for welfare reform. And Bill Clinton vetoed it twice and then realized that his political career was going to be in real trouble, and so he signed welfare reform. He says, we would change welfare as we know it, and we did. Now it's all changing back. But that's why I've been so frustrated with, I think the jury's still out on Paul Ryan, but I think Mitch McConnell and Boehner were a disappointment to me because instead of saying, 1, 2, 3, 4, hey, look, we don't have the votes, so give Obama everything he wants. We'll fund Obamacare, we'll fund all the things he wants. They didn't engage the country, and that's what constitutional republicans work. If you want to change Washington, change the people's mind first. It's hard. It's really hard to do. But once you change the people's mind, Washington will follow along. Politicians don't organize parades. They look for them, and then they jump in front of them, and then they claim to have led them. That's fine, right? There's very few politicians actually create parades. Newt did it. And there's actually, I'll just share this, culturally, there's only 2 politicians that I can think of in my lifetime that actually changed policy based on a cultural change. What is a cultural change? Cultural change is nobody in this room has lit up a cigarette in the entire meeting, and some of you want to, I'm sure. But why? Because it's become culturally unacceptable to light up a cigarette in a room like this, right? And when I grew up, it wasn't. Seatbelts, people wear seatbelts. I was driving without my seatbelt again the other day, and my daughter's in the back seat. Daddy, put your seatbelt on. Yeah, oh, right, okay, I put my seatbelt on, right? That's a cultural change. Newt got welfare reform changed because he convinced the country that welfare was bad for people. That was a cultural change, and that was very hard to do. And the second was Rudy Giuliani. Interestingly enough, he changed the way people view policing in America by CompStat. He did it with Chief Bratton. They actually proved that policing techniques could stop crime before it happened. No one believed that before that. That was a cultural change. And Times Square, a little worse than it was before, but way better than it was when I grew up, is vibrant and today and as safe today as it is because Rudy Giuliani won an argument on policing through a cultural change. Thank you very much. I appreciate you all having me.
Let me give you a gift here. Thank you, Rick. That was very interesting. And I want to give you the token of appreciation from KIOGA for coming to our meeting.
Thanks, Ed.
And, thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Let's give him another round of applause. Okay, that will conclude our breakfast session. Our seminars will start at 10 o'clock. We'll have a couple of those over outside in the meeting rooms over here. So, Nick, do you have anything else? Yeah, she's at. Yeah. Okay, so we'd be adjourned.